Maybe it was The Martian, or A Thousand Splendid Suns, or perhaps it was Fahrenheit 451, or a favorite book in the Harry Potter series, or a classic like Frankenstein. But every reader I've spoken to has a few books that brought them back from the brink of booklessness. Books that they found, or rather books that found them when things seemed to die in their reading life. When they stopped reading, when they lost the habit, or simply when they forgot that they loved reading books. And we carry these books with us throughout our lives because, in a small way or a large way, these books all saved us, or at least the reader inside of us, from being away from books. And I have had many such moments in my life. Today, I want to share 12 of those moments through 12 books that helped me to fall back in love with reading. And my hope is that one of them might help you to rise above a challenge in your life, to escape a reading slump, or simply to remember why you started reading in the first place. Now, the first book on this list is The Book Thief. Now, this one I absolutely adored. As a child, I loved to read, but somewhere in my teenage years, I began to drift away a little bit. And this was one of the first books that really brought me back. It totally surprised me when I read this. I was not expecting this book to be as good as it was. It's set in Nazi Germany, and it follows this young girl who basically, she's stealing books and sharing these stories during one of the darkest and most inhumane periods in human history. But what really struck me was the creative narrative voice in this book. The story is narrated by Death. And that perspective, to me at the time as a kid, this was revolutionary. And I think it makes the novel beautiful and haunting, but also unexpectedly tender in a way. This book definitely will make you cry. And it reminded me, when I first read this, how emotionally resonant a great book could be. Just how much it can really change your perspective on things. If you're feeling, a little bit dead, a book can bring you back alive. The Book Thief. The second book, Tarzan of the Apes. This one is one of the most gripping books that I've ever read in terms of pure adventure. This is one of the greatest. It tells the story of a boy who's raised by apes in an African jungle and who eventually encounters the human world after being raised by animals. And he's trying to understand where he belongs. So it's a classic story. It's one of the great adventure stories. There's certainly elements that maybe have aged poorly, shall we say. I mentioned this on a recent video, and a lot of people are saying this story is not good. It's a product of its time. The truth is, the momentum and the storytelling in this story is amazing. Recognizing it for what it is, it'll totally carry you away. It reminded me, again, how thrilling reading could be. And I think that's why this book really resonated for me. The idea that you could just disappear into a book, forget everything around you, and just be reading. So, Tarzan of the Apes. The third one I read was Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is one that found me exactly at the right time. It felt kind of edgy, I think, when I read it. It was interesting and romantic and perfectly nostalgic, the kind of nostalgia that I hadn't really been exposed to, but I needed at that time. I even introduced this to a close artist friend of mine, and he still calls it his favorite novel. On the surface, this is a story about this mysterious man named Jay Gatsby, who builds an extravagant life and an empire, basically with the hopes of reclaiming a woman, perhaps a past, perhaps a life that he lost. But it's really about the American dream and about the naive and youthful dream that so many of us, I think, have, that we think that if we just reach the right place, if we just become the right person, recover that exact moment, then everything will finally fall into place. Everything will be complete. Sometimes I think of Gatsby almost as the grown-up Peter Pan in a way. And, this book, the thing about it that's amazing is it could become something completely different as well. That's the wonderful thing about great books of this sort. They can be read and reread and interpreted endlessly. You'll highlight perfect passages, but all of these books can be totally different in their meaning when you read them at different phases of your life. After reading those three books, I went on a complete classics tear. I read Frankenstein, I read Fahrenheit 451, Robinson Crusoe, Journey to the Center of the Earth, lots of Jules Verne, a bunch of Orwell, Brave New World, and then so many books, and probably was the beginning of one of my most deep reading periods. And then in college, a few years later, I had fallen off a little bit again, probably because I was mostly studying the sciences. But in my first year, I read my Antonia by Willa Cather in this English elective. At the time, like I said, I was on the scholarship track for pre-med, so I wasn't really doing a lot of reading. Maybe that's why I had fallen off. But I think reading this book was one of the tipping points in my life, a point of recognition, of finally coming to terms with how deeply I loved reading and great books, great works of literature. This book follows a man looking back on his childhood and his memory of Antonia, this daughter of Bohemian immigrants, and that were trying to create this life on the American frontier. The descriptions are really second to none. The landscapes don't merely provide a setting, they are immersive and spiritual and alive, and they are setting his character in the best way. This is also one of the first times I really encountered the full force of the idea of the sublime. Obviously, I'd encountered it before in the books that I'd read, but I'd missed it in my youthful ignorance. Here, for the first time, I really, really felt it. Years later, when I would read Moby Dick, this book really helped prepare me for that. So I highly recommend checking this out. This book changed something in me, and it really got me back into reading again and probably changed the trajectory of my life, as all of these books probably did. The fifth book here is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Now, I listened to this as an audiobook during the pandemic, actually. I had been working as a lifeguard at the time while I was attending university, but when everything shut down, the pool shut down, everyone was laid off, so I had to find another job. So I found a job as a custodian to help pay for school. And school was all online, so it was just me cleaning schools, and while I cleaned, I listened to Of Mice and Men and then many other books, and that really got me started in my audiobook journey. It tells the story of George and Lenny. They're two traveling laborers that are pursuing a small dream of independence in the Great Depression era. It's really short, but it's, in spite of its simplicity, it's really a devastating look at, I guess, humans and the mistakes that we make, our failures to acknowledge our strength at times and what that can lead to. The experience began my love affair with audiobooks, as I said, and also with Steinbeck, who's now one of my favorite writers of all time. I think this is an excellent starting place for Steinbeck because it's so short and so affecting, and will just really get you to feel the emotional weight that you can have reading one small Steinbeck novel, and you can extrapolate that to reading larger ones. Since then, I've loved The Grapes of Wrath, The Pearls, another short one, Cannery Row, others, and East of Eden has become one of my favorite books of all time. A few years later, after reading those, I discovered the poetry of Robert Frost. I was taken in by its beautiful, beautiful contrasts, the simplicity and the depth in the natural world, and the darkness hiding inside of it, hiding beneath it. The thing with Frost is he has great range, but his poems appear gentle and familiar, but there's often a really unsettling element beneath the surface. One of my personal favorites is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Day. And this poem, and I should find it in here, it's probably about halfway through, really is one that resonated with me throughout the years. The look at the beautiful landscape, but ending with a bit of a haunting refrain. And that is something that you can expect from reading the beautiful poetry of Robert Frost. But for myself, getting back into this poetry then led me on to read Blake and Shelley and more Shakespeare, and it just got me back into poetry on a really deep level that I wasn't really into before. So the poetry of Robert Frost. Now the seventh book here is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. Now, I could mention a number of Gaiman books that could fit on this list, but I remember taking this book into a forest called Bosque de la Primavera near Guadalajara, Mexico. And I was living there at the time. I found a gorgeous, isolated gorge, and I just sat there and read this. The story follows Nobody Owens, a boy raised by ghosts in a graveyard after his family's murdered. And it's really strange and imaginative, and a play on The Jungle Book, which is also a wonderful story. This book is super moving. You come to expect that from Neil Gaiman. After reading it in the forest, I began writing one of my first short stories that I was genuinely proud of as well, which was a turning point in my writing journey. I may have lost that story, which might maybe slightly tragic, although I'm not giving up hope. I know I wrote it in a physical journal, so I'm sure it might be around somewhere. But I remember that period fondly. The book brought me back from a dry spell, again, as a reader, but it also encouraged me to write. So in this case, there's really two reasons to be thankful for having found the Graveyard Book. And another children's book that really did the same thing years later for me was A Wrinkle in Time. Now, this one is interesting because I had read this one a couple of times. The first time I read it, it didn't really resonate with me particularly. I remember enjoying it, I guess, but it didn't really stick with me. It was like, yeah, I guess I'd read A Wrinkle in Time, could tell you maybe what it's about, but I maybe just didn't read it at the right time of my life. And that's something that can absolutely happen. A great book, and you're a great reader, but it's just not the right time. You're distracted, your mind is fractured, and you don't really get it. The second time, this book deeply inspired me in my reading, in my writing, in my ethical quests in life too. There's so much wisdom in this book that I was able to draw from. It follows Meg as she travels through space and time with her friends, her younger brother, Charles Wallace, who's an awesome character, and their friend Calvin, searching for her missing father and confronting a force of darkness that seeks to erase all individuality. At its heart, this book really offers a beautiful reminder that our flaws are important. They don't merely make us who we are, they also hint at who we could become. And they provide an opportunity for us to grow. We have to learn how to turn our flaws into something good, into something unique and powerful in the way that Meg does. She isn't the smartest or the most spiritually endowed in this particular world of magic, but she's the one with the most honest flaws, and that is really the thing that matters. Just absolutely beautiful. You can get emotional even just thinking about it here, but sometimes the very thing we dislike most about ourselves can become a source of compassion and strength and courage if we can just learn to see beyond it, just learn to see a different perspective on ourselves and others. Now, another children's classic that honestly is a must include on this list, now you probably knew this one was coming if you've watched some of my videos, The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. This book is just a beautiful story. I recently read it in my book club as the children's selection for June, but I had also read it not too long ago. I think I read it earlier this year. The first time I encountered it was with a family book club, actually, with my grandmother as well, which made it just a truly special experience. The story follows Mole and Rat and Badger and the wonderfully reckless Mr. Toad through a series of adventures along the riverbank and beyond. I won't say too much about that here because this is a classic. I've spoken about it before, but it's truly one of the best books ever written about home and adventure and friendship as well, and that kind of deep comfort of return to the places that we love. So this is a gorgeous, gorgeous story. Next up, I have number 10, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This book sent me on another enormous reading tear. When I first read it, after reading Little Women, I went on to read Jane Eyre and a couple of Jane Austen novels for the first time. I think I reread Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, The Secret Garden. Then I expanded outwards, and I remember reading The Picture of Dorian Gray shortly after this and going on a lot of H.G. Wells adventures, Sherlock Holmes, but it became really the first year of next level reading in terms of like becoming truly voracious. I think this was the first year I read over 100 books. And I don't mean merely just the number of books, because that's not so important. The number itself doesn't really matter. I've had years that have been great reading years where I've read less, and I've had years where I've read more, but I don't know if that meant that it was the best reading year per se. Little Women itself is just a gorgeous story, and it reminds us that, if you can read this well, what matters most is the depth and engagement and enjoyment that you find in whatever story you're reading. And this one offers such a great opportunity for that. It follows the March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, Amy. They're growing up, they're pursuing their ambitions, there's loss, and they gradually discover which lives they each want to lead, and they're all different. Jo, of course, is one of literature's great aspiring writers, and I think, for anyone who's a writer, that's going to resonate, obviously, on a deeper level, but I think all of us are writers, we just don't know it yet, right? I think this book reminds me that a story does not need to be an enormous war or mystery or adventure story to feel important. Of course, those types of stories are awesome, but the ordinariness of human life is really an adventure of its own. And so that is a great entry here. Now, number 11, I have a book that I don't have physically here, but one that I love. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Sometimes you don't need a book that totally transforms your, I guess, understanding of the world, of existence. Sometimes it's just a book that is unputdownable that will get you back into reading. And this was the case when I read And Then There Were None. I was actually listening to it on a family road trip as well. So all of these kind of have resonances with different periods of life. And it really, really got me back into reading. I read a lot of physical books after reading this, even though I listened to this one. So it can go both ways. I'm really a big fan of both physical and audiobooks. But anyways, after that tangent, the premise of this book is a bunch of strangers, 10 strangers, are invited to an isolated island, and each of them has a secret. They're hiding something, and one by one, they begin to die. And it's this fast-paced, clever, super entertaining whodunit mystery. It's one of those books that reminds you reading is not a homework assignment. It's fun. It's exciting. It's thrilling. There's so many other great mystery novels, whodunit novels, but once a book gets you turning the pages again, it can just open the door to anything else. So sometimes just picking a book that is going to get you reading and who did it? I don't know what happened. That will be the one that will get you back into reading. That was certainly the case for me with And Then There Were None. And the final book here is one that I actually just began, right? So A Man Called Ove. This one, I think that's how you pronounce it. I recently picked it up at a library book sale. I started reading the first few pages and immediately I fell in love with the voice. I thought, this is just such a great story. My mother actually loves this story as well. So that was another recommendation of why I think I probably picked it up at the library book sale. But it follows this super grumpy, isolated old guy who he has this very ordered life and then it gets disrupted. And I don't know what happens after that, but I'm excited to see. I'm excited to continue reading. My mother told me it's one of her favorite books, as I said, so that recommendation is high. I've heard good things about it from other people, so I can't tell you exactly where it will lead me, but there is something wonderful about realizing only a few pages into a book, that old feeling of returning, that old curiosity, that old warmth and sense of possibility, the need to keep reading. So there you have it, 12 books, or in the case of, I guess, Robert Frost's collection of poetry that helped me to fall back in love with reading. And I already feel slightly disrespectful for leaving so many other great books off of the list here. There were books that I loved as a child, the Percy Jackson series, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, what have you. And there were also books like The Kite Runner. That's another great one. Or Moby Dick, plays of Shakespeare that got me into reading, got me back more deep into my reading. So there are so many books that have relit the spark of reading at different moments in my life, but these are the 12 that came to mind today. So I hope that at least one of them might help you recover or strengthen or deepen your own love of reading. What are the books that brought you back from the brink of booklessness? I'm curious, and let me know in the comments if you are interested. I would love to hear from you guys. I'll see you in the next one.